Welcome to the Funeral Channel Network podcast. You are listening to The Deep Dive. I'm your host, and today we are going to talk about a feeling that I think almost everyone recognizes, but absolutely no one wants to admit to.
It's the big one.
It really is. It's the dirty little secret of the grieving process.
It is the taboo emotion.
It is. I want you to picture this. It's maybe, 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
The phone rings. You've been dreading this specific ringtone for months, maybe even years.
You know exactly what that call is.
No. You answer it, you hear the voice on the other end say, "It's over, he's gone," and your very first reaction, before the tears, before the grief, before any of the planning, is this physical sensation. Your shoulders just drop.
You can finally breathe.
Your lungs inflate for what feels like the first time in forever, and you feel good.
You feel light.
You feel light. And then, maybe 3 seconds later, the shame hits you like a truck. You feel like an absolute monster.
The immediate thought is, I must be a sociopath.
It's exactly. Who feels good when their dad dies? But the source material we are looking at today, an incredibly insightful breakdown from the funeral program site called The Complexity of Relief. It argues that this reaction is not only common, it's biological.
It's biological, and it's so important we talk about this. The mission for today's deep dive is really about normalization. We want to blow this whole topic open, because for so many people, the reality of loss isn't just a single note of sadness.
No, it's much more complicated than that.
It's a whole chord, and sometimes that chord includes a sense of a burden being lifted. So today, we're going to unpack why relief happens, biologically and psychologically, and then look at that crushing guilt that almost always follows it, that guilt spiral.
And ultimately, I think the goal here is to explain why feeling better in some ways doesn't mean you love the person any less.
That's the key takeaway. They are not mutually exclusive.
Okay, so let's set the stage here. The popular idea of grief is, pure, unadulterated sadness, right? It's like a movie where it's raining at the graveside and everyone is just completely devastated.
Oh, absolutely. That is the cultural script we are handed from birth. We're taught that the intensity of our pain is the measuring stick for the depth of our love.
Right. If you aren't wailing and throwing yourself on the casket, you're not doing it right. You didn't love them enough.
If you're devastated, you love them perfectly. If you are functioning or, God forbid, relieved, then your love is immediately suspect. But the reality is just so much messier.
And the source material makes a very, very strong case that this relief, it's not a moral failing. It's a physiological response. It's your body talking, not your heart.
Exactly. So let's get into that.
Okay, let's get into the mechanics of this. Section 1, the anatomy of relief. When we say relief, I want to be really clear about what the source material is actually describing. Because I think when people hear that word, they imagine, a party, someone high-fiving in the funeral home.
Right, and that's the immediate defensive reaction people have internally. I'm not happy they're dead. And the source makes this crystal clear. Relief is not celebration. It's not happiness.
So what is it?
It is defined in the text as the loosening of constant strain. Think about it this way. Imagine you're holding a 50-pound weight above your head.
Okay.
You hold it for an hour, then a day. Then you're holding it for a month, for a year. When you finally get to put that weight down, you aren't happy in the sense of jumping for joy.
No, you're just not in pain anymore. Your arms are shaking.
You are simply experiencing the cessation of extreme effort, the end of the strain.
That is such a crucial distinction. It's the subtraction of a negative, not the addition of a positive.
Precisely. It's the absence of pressure. And the source lists some really specific types of relief we see. The first one is the one we're all sort of allowed to talk about.
The noble one.
The noble one, yes. The relief that their suffering has ended. I'm just glad he's not in pain anymore. That's acceptable.
We can say that one out loud.
We can, but then there's the relief that our constant worry is over.
That hypervigilance. That feeling of always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Always. Is today the day I get the call? Is today the day we end up in the ER again? And then there's a huge one. Relief that the immense caregiving demands have finally ceased.
We'll have to dig into that one specifically.
We will.
Okay.
And finally, the one that's maybe the absolute hardest to admit, relief that the conflict or the chaos is gone.
Yeah, that's a tough one. But before we get to that, I want to understand the context. This relief doesn't just happen in a vacuum, right? I mean, you don't feel relief if someone you love dies suddenly in a car crash.
No, not at all. In a sudden, unexpected death, you feel shock, you feel trauma, you feel disbelief. Relief is almost exclusively tied to specific long-term precursors.
So what are those?
We see this most often in cases of prolonged illness. Things like cancer, COPD, chronic pain, and of course, the long goodbye of dementia and other neurological declines.
That phrase, the long goodbye, is so heavy. It implies that the grieving process actually started way before the physical death.
It does. It absolutely does. In those cases, the mourner, the caregiver, they've been in a state of anticipatory grief and high alert for a very long time. You're grieving the loss of the person they were, even while you're caring for the person they've become.
The source also mentions addiction and mental illness. I imagine the relief there is tied to something slightly different.
It is. In those cases, the relief is often tied to the end of unpredictability, the end of the chaos factor.
Right. Is the phone going to ring at 3 a.m. with a call from the police, from the hospital? Are they safe? Are they using again? Are they in jail? When that cycle of crisis finally stops, the silence must be deafening, but also, in a way, physically calming.
And that brings us to the most important part of this section, the nervous system connection, the text highlights. This is where we need to get a little technical to really get our heads around the why. Because this isn't just a thought in your head, it's a profound reaction in your body.
Okay, so break that down for us. What is actually happening to us on a biological level?
So think about your autonomic nervous system. It basically has two main modes, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic.
Fight or flight, and what's the other one?
Rest and digest. The sympathetic is your fight or flight response. It's designed for short bursts of intense survival. A tiger jumps out from behind a bush, your cortisol and adrenaline spike, your heart races, you run like heck.
And then the tiger leaves, and your body calms down.
Ideally, yes. The threat is gone, your system returns to baseline. But in the context of a long illness or a chaotic home life with an addict, the tiger never leaves.
The tiger moves into the living room.
The tiger is in the living room for 5 years. So you are living in a state of chronic, unrelenting hyperarousal. Your body is just flooding itself with stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
That can't be good for you.
It's terrible for you. Biologists have a term for it, allostatic load. It's the cumulative wear and tear on the body that results from this chronic stress. It damages your immune system, your cardiovascular system, everything.
So you're essentially running a marathon at a full sprint pace, but for years on end.
Exactly. You are constantly redlining the engine. Now, when the death finally occurs, the source of that unending stress is removed. The tiger is gone.
And the body? Yeah, it just sighs.
It does more than sigh. Your body involuntarily shifts from that sympathetic state to the parasympathetic state, that rest and digest mode. It's a physiological dump of tension.
So that feeling of lightness, that feeling of relief, that's just the engine finally cooling down, the machine powering off.
It is. It's your muscles unclenching for the first time in years. It's your breath actually reaching the bottom of your lungs. It's your blood pressure dropping. And the source emphasizes this so clearly. Your body doesn't know morality. It doesn't know grief etiquette.
It just knows threat or no threat.
Precisely. Your body only knows threat versus safety. And when the threat is finally definitively gone, the body exhales.
That is fascinating, but also, you're right, it's kind of brutal. It makes us sound like these biological machines.
Well, in some ways we are. We're a combination of biology and psychology. And acknowledging the biological part can be incredibly forgiving for the psychological part. You wouldn't feel guilty for shivering if you were cold, would you?
No, of course not.
You wouldn't feel guilty for sneezing. Those are biological reflexes you can't control. Relief, in this specific context, is a biological reflex to the cessation of a chronic threat.
But, and this is the big but, we aren't just biology. We have brains. We have that big, complicated neocortex that just loves to judge every single thing we do and feel.
And that leads us directly into section 2, the guilt spiral.
Because the body goes, whew, and the brain immediately goes, how dare you?
How dare you? That is the internal monologue, almost verbatim for so many people. The source describes this as happening almost immediately. It's a 1-2 punch. Relief appears, and guilt follows like its shadow, instantly.
It's that thought of, how can I possibly feel relieved when my mom, my husband, my child just died?
And we immediately interpret that relief as evidence of a lack of love.
That's the fear, isn't it? The fear is that the relief signals a lack of loyalty, a lack of compassion. If I'm relieved, it must mean I'm selfish. It must mean, on some dark level, I wanted this to happen.
Which is a horrifying thought to have about yourself.
It is. So where does that script come from? Why is that our default setting? Why do we jump to self-condemnation?
Well, the source points directly to cultural narratives. We're scripted by society from a very young age to believe that grief is supposed to look a certain way. We see it in movies. We read it in books. The good mourner is the one who is inconsolable.
The one who can't eat, can't sleep, can't function. The one whose life just stops.
Exactly. That's the performance of good grief. We're taught that our visible outward pain is the only true measure of our inward love.
So if I manage to sleep through the night after the funeral, I'm failing the grief test.
In the eyes of that powerful cultural narrative, yes, you are failing the test of devotion. But the whole point of the source material we're looking at is to try and rewrite that script. It argues that the intensity of your pain is not the only metric for the depth of your love.
You can love someone fiercely and still be relieved that the ordeal is over.
You can. But the consequence of this script, for so many, is silence.
And isolation.
Total isolation. If you genuinely believe that your feelings are wrong or evil or monstrous, you're not going to share them. You're not going to turn to your best friend and say, honestly, I'm kind of glad it's over, because you're terrified they will judge you.
You're afraid they'll look at you like you're that sociopath you fear you are.
So you suffer alone. You carry this immense weight of guilt privately, thinking you're the only person in the world who's ever felt this way. And you perform grief.
Perform grief. That's a haunting phrase. You're putting on the costume, acting out the role you think you're supposed to play, while inside you're feeling something totally different and shameful.
And that dissonance, that gap between your inner reality and your outer performance, is profoundly exhausting. It takes so much energy to hide your truth.
I want to zoom in on a specific group of people here, because the source material dedicates a whole section to them, and I think they carry the absolute heaviest load of this guilt. Section 3. The caregiver's burden.
The source calls it the 0 hour for caregivers.
Right. And the text notes that relief is especially common among primary caregivers. But I feel like we need to be really clear about what we mean by caregiver in this context. We aren't talking about someone who just drops off groceries once a week.
No, absolutely not. We are talking about the primary, in the trenches, hands-on caregiver, the spouse who is changing adult diapers and cleaning bed sores, the daughter who is managing a complex medication schedule where one wrong pill at the wrong time could be fatal.
The person who is on duty 24/7.
We are talking about sleep deprivation that in other contexts would be considered a form of torture.
Let's talk about that sleep aspect for a minute, because the source lists sleep deprivation as a major factor, but I think people underestimate what that actually means.
It's huge. If you are caring for someone with dementia who sundowns, which means they get agitated, confused, and often wander at night, you are sleeping with one eye open for years on end.
You're listening for every creak of a floorboard.
You are terrified they'll get up and turn on the stove or unlock the front door and walk out into the cold. Your brain never, ever actually enters the deep restorative stages of REM sleep.
So you're in a perpetual state of low-grade panic, even when you're sleeping.
Never. You're in a state of constant vigilance. And over time, that completely destroys your cognitive function, your emotional regulation, your physical health. You are literally systemically breaking down.
And that's just the physical part. There's the emotional burnout, too. The source mentions loss of identity.
That is such a profound and often overlooked loss. When you are a full-time caregiver, your own identity gets completely consumed by that role. It has to.
You stop being Sarah the architect or Mike the golfer.
You do. You become the nurse, the protector, the manager. Your entire schedule, your social life, your entire mental bandwidth is dedicated to one single all-consuming task, keeping another human being alive and safe.
So when that person dies, the job just ends.
The job ends instantly, abruptly. It's the 0 hour. The oxygen machine stops beeping. The medication schedule is empty. The constant phone calls with doctors stop. And the relief that floods into that sudden vacuum is the relief of a soldier coming home from a long and brutal war.
The source calls it the human defense.
Yes, and I love that framing. The text argues that feeling relief in this moment doesn't mean you wanted the person to die. It means you were human under sustained, inhuman pressure. You were holding up the sky. When the sky is finally gone, your muscles relax. That's not hatred, that's physics.
But the post-death struggle for these caregivers is so unique. There's the immediate guilt for feeling free. I've heard people say, with such shame, I can go to the grocery store now without checking my phone every 2 minutes. And then they just hate themselves for even thinking it.
It's also what the text calls the crash. It's the exhaustion that finally catches up all at once. You've been running on pure adrenaline for 2, 3, 5 years. Suddenly, the adrenaline faucet is turned off.
And your body just gives out.
You might get sick, you might sleep for 3 days straight, and then, in the quiet that follows, comes that identity crisis. Who am I now that I'm not keeping someone alive? That void can feel like relief and terror at the exact same time.
There's another angle to this caregiver relief that I found really touching and important in the source material.
Yeah.
It's not just relief for yourself, it's relief for them. The empathy angle.
This is the pivot. This is the reframe that can help people start to forgive themselves. Often we focus on what feels like the selfish relief. I'm glad I don't have to do all that work anymore.
But it's more than that.
It's so much more. The source highlights that this relief is often deeply, deeply rooted in empathy. If you have watched someone you love disintegrate from cancer or lose their mind piece by piece to dementia, you are a first-hand witness to profound suffering. You are witnessing a daily loss of dignity.
So the relief is, thank God they aren't hurting anymore. Thank God they're not scared.
Exactly. Thank God they are safe. Thank God their dignity has been restored. It's a release from the pain of being a helpless witness to their pain. But even that can trigger guilt.
How so?
People feel like they shouldn't be okay with the death on any level. They feel like acknowledging the peace of death betrays the tragedy of the loss. But the text argues that this is actually a profound form of love. You love them enough to hate their pain.
You love them enough to hate their pain. That is powerful. That reframes the relief from, I wanted them gone, to I wanted them to be peaceful.
Correct. It aligns your relief with their well-being, not with your own convenience. And that's a much more compassionate way to see it.
Now, I want to shift gears a little bit here because this is important. We've talked a lot about these tragic medical situations, the noble struggles, you could say. But what about when the relationship itself was the tragedy? Section 4 of the source material covers complicated relationships and unsafe grief.
This is the darker, more hidden side of relief, yes. And it's the one people are even more terrified to talk about.
Because not every relationship is a Hallmark movie. The source explicitly mentions things like estrangement, emotional abuse, addiction, and instability.
Right. When we talk about relief in these contexts, we aren't talking about the end of caregiving. We're talking about the end of fear, the end of walking on eggshells.
So let's play this out. If you grew up with a parent who was, say, emotionally abusive or maybe an alcoholic, your daily life was completely unpredictable.
It was a minefield. Your entire childhood was spent trying to read the room, trying to anticipate the next explosion. You never knew which version of them was going to walk through the door.
Is Dad drunk tonight? Is Mom in one of her moods?
Your nervous system was tuned from childhood to detect threat from the very person who was supposed to provide safety and security. That is a profound betrayal of the parent-child bond.
So when that person dies, the threat is neutralized.
The minefield is finally permanently deactivated. And the relief you feel is the relief of safety. It's a physiological realization that no one is going to yell at you tonight. No one is going to gaslight you or manipulate you. The chaos has ended.
The source lists some specific internal questions that come up in these situations, and they are heart-wrenching. Things like, am I allowed to grieve someone who hurt me? And is it wrong to feel safer now?
Those questions are so common and so painful, and the answer the text provides is incredibly validating for people in this position.
Which is?
The core insight is that grief does not require an ideal relationship. This is a huge misconception that traps people in guilt. People think you only have the right to grieve the saints.
Is that how it works?
Not at all. You grieve the attachment, you grieve the biological connection, you grieve the hope for what could have been. But you can grieve the loss of the person and feel safer in their absence at the same time.
Safety versus sadness.
They can coexist. And validation is absolutely key here. The source says, in no uncertain terms, it is okay to feel relief that a source of trauma is gone from your life. You are allowed to value your own safety and well-being. That relief is your survival instinct finally acknowledging that the danger has passed.
But isn't there a specific kind of guilt there, too? The I should forgive them guilt, the don't speak ill of the dead pressure.
Oh, absolutely. Like, society loves to canonize the dead. It's a way of tidying up messy stories. So you go to the funeral and you hear a eulogy where everyone is saying, he was such a great man, a pillar of the community, and you're sitting there in the pew thinking, he made my life a living hell.
That disconnect must be incredibly isolating.
It's crazy making. And so to handle that, you have to learn to separate the person from the relationship. You can mourn the potential you lost. You can mourn the father you wished you'd had.
You can mourn the fact that now that they're dead, they will never get better, they'll never apologize. That hope for reconciliation is officially gone.
Exactly. The hope for a different ending is dead, and that is a real loss to grieve. But you can grieve that loss and still be profoundly relieved that the act of abuse has stopped.
This brings us perfectly to what I think is the core philosophy of this entire deep dive, Section 5, the philosophy of duality. Because it seems like the problem isn't the feeling itself. The problem is that we think we can only feel one thing at a time.
Exactly. We live in a very binary culture. Good or bad, happy or sad, love or hate, black or white. But grief is not binary. It is the ultimate gray zone. The source calls this emotional duality.
Which is the capacity to hold two contradictory truths in your hands at the exact same time without judging either one.
And without thinking that one cancels out the other.
Let's walk through the specific examples the text gives, because I think seeing them laid out side by side is really helpful. The first one, missing them versus relief they aren't suffering.
Both are true. You wish they were still here, sitting on the couch with you, and you are deeply glad they are no longer in agonizing pain. You don't have to choose one truth. They're both valid.
Okay, next one, loving them versus relief that caregiving ended.
You would have done anything for them, and you did for years, and you are bone-tired and glad you can finally sleep through the night. Those two things don't cancel each other out. Your love and your exhaustion are both real.
And the last one, grieving the loss versus peace that a difficult chapter has closed.
You are genuinely sad the story of their life is over, and you are simultaneously relieved that the struggle of that final, painful chapter is done.
The text has this one line that I think everyone listening needs to just write down and put on their mirror. It says, relief is a response, not a wish.
That is the most critical distinction in the entire piece. It is the key to unlocking self-forgiveness. Let's break that down. Relief is a response, not a wish. Feeling relieved after the death has occurred is not the same thing as wishing for their death before it happened. You didn't cause this with your feelings. You didn't manifest this with your exhaustion. You were simply responding to the new reality of the situation.
It's the difference between cause and effect. My relief didn't cause the death.
Precisely. Your relief didn't kill them. Their illness or their addiction or their age killed them. Your relief is just your mind and body reacting to the aftermath.
And the other major clarification in this section is about love. Relief is about the end of suffering, theirs or yours, not the end of love.
Right. Relief does not cancel grief. They are not opposites. They can be roommates. They can live in the same house inside of you. Just because relief walks into the living room for a while doesn't mean grief has packed its bags and moved out. They coexist.
I think that coexistence is what's so confusing for people, especially when the timeline gets all messed up. Which brings us to Section 6, the body and the timeline. What happens when the relief actually comes first? Before the sadness.
This is the phenomenon of delayed grief. And it really, really scares people. They're at the funeral or in the days immediately following the death, and they feel fine. They feel numb or maybe even weirdly light and functional.
And they think, why am I not crying? I'm like a cold-hearted robot. What is wrong with me?
Why am I functioning so well when my world just fell apart? The explanation, again, is biological. Your body is just exiting survival mode.
It's still in that threat is gone phase.
It is. When you've been in a high-stress crisis for a long time, your body has a massive backlog of basic maintenance it needs to perform. It needs to sleep. It needs to digest food properly. It needs to lower your heart rate and blood pressure. So very often, the first response to the death is a physical crash and a sense of, okay, the immediate emergency is over. Time to repair the systems.
It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can't get to the self-actualization of emotional processing if your basic physiological needs haven't been met.
Exactly. Physiological safety comes before emotional processing. The body has to feel safe and rested enough to even begin to touch the grief. The source even lists the physical signs of this release. Deeper breathing.
Just actually taking a full deep breath for the first time in months.
Muscle relaxation. That feeling of your shoulders finally dropping away from your ears, and improved sleep.
I've heard so many people say with immense guilt that the first night after a loved one died from a long illness was the best, deepest sleep they'd had in years.
And they wake up feeling both rested and horrified at themselves. But that sleep is necessary fuel. You have to think of it as the body restocking the shelves for the hard work ahead, because the grief is coming.
That's the ambush, right? That's what the grief counselors call it.
That's the ambush. Once the body is rested, once the practical arrangements are made, once the survival mode is fully deactivated, The emotional processing center of the brain finally opens for business. And it says, okay, now we have the energy. Now we have to deal with the magnitude of the loss.
And if you aren't expecting that, you might think you are having a complete breakdown 3 months down the line.
You're standing in the grocery store aisle looking at cereal, and suddenly you're on the floor sobbing, and you have no idea why it's happening now.
It's happening now because you are finally safe enough to fall apart.
That's it. Grief requires safety. It requires energy. The initial period of relief actually provides that safety and energy. So, in a strange way, the relief is the first step of the grieving process, not the opposite of it.
Wow. That is a huge reframe. Relief isn't the absence of grief, it's the preparation for it.
It's the runway.
So, okay, we've established that this is normal. We've established it's biological. We've established it doesn't make you a bad person. But how do we actually live with it? How do we manage it? Because that guilt is sticky. Section 7, practical tools for navigating relief. The source material doesn't just diagnose the problem. It gives us some strategies. The first one is about reframing guilt.
Yes. This is about changing the language you use inside your own head. The core strategy is to reframe the feeling of relief as an act of compassion.
What does that look like in practice?
So instead of letting the thought, I'm so relieved, run on a loop, which feels selfish, you consciously change the wording. Try it saying, I have compassion for the fact that their suffering has finally ended. That directs the feeling outward.
And what about the part that's for you?
Equally important, you say, I have compassion for myself that my prolonged strain has ended. You acknowledge your own suffering.
Compassion for the self. That is a really hard one for a lot of people, especially caregivers who are used to putting themselves last. We're usually our own harshest critics.
It is. But try the best friend test. If your best friend had been caring for a dying parent for 5 brutal years and she called you and whispered, I'm just so glad I can sleep tonight, would you point a finger at her and call her a monster?
Of course not. I'd tell her she deserves the rest. I'd tell her I was proud of her.
You'd say, you did an amazing thing. It's okay to rest now. You have to learn to treat yourself with that same grace. You've carried a heavy load. It is okay to put it down.
Another tool the source mentions is about who we talk to about this. It's titled Safe Spaces and Talking, and the source specifically warns us about the wrong listener.
Oh, this is vital. Not everyone deserves your vulnerability on this topic. Not everyone is equipped to hear the sentence, I'm relieved my dad is dead, and not flinch.
So if you say that to someone who subscribes to that hallmark black and white version of grief,
They will look at you with horror. Or they'll try to fix you, they'll judge you, or they'll rush to reassure you by saying, oh, you don't really mean that, you're just upset.
which is the most invalidating thing in the world. Yes, I do mean it.
Right. So you need to carefully identify your safe listeners. These are the people who don't judge, who don't moralize, and who don't immediately try to paper over your feelings with platitudes. They are the ones who can just sit in the dark with you.
The ones who could just say, yeah, that makes sense. It was really, really hard.
That's it. That's the magic phrase. And if you don't have that person in your life, because let's be honest, not everyone does, there are other options.
Like what?
Journaling. Just get it out of your head and onto paper. Writing the forbidden sentence, I am relieved, on a piece of paper can take so much of the toxic power out of the secret. Or, of course, therapy. The source is very clear on this. Therapists and grief counselors hear this all the time.
You will not shock a grief counselor by admitting you feel relief.
Not even a little bit. They're the safest possible place to unpack this whole concept of permission.
Permission, just giving yourself permission to feel what you actually feel without having to justify it to anyone, including yourself. That's huge. The source also talks about rituals, which is interesting coming from the funeral program site.
Yeah.
They make a great point that memorials don't have to be fake or idealized.
Yes, I love this part. There is this huge tendency to whitewash the dead at funerals, to turn complicated, difficult human beings into perfect saints the moment they die.
But the source argues that a truly meaningful memorialization acknowledges the whole story. It acknowledges the struggle. It acknowledges the endurance, both theirs and yours.
So how do you do that without being disrespectful? You can't exactly stand up and say, he was a real pain in the neck most of the time in the eulogy.
No, probably not.
But you can use code. You can use honest but kind language. Instead of saying he was always happy and cheerful, you can say he fought a long, hard battle and we are all so grateful that he is finally at peace.
That phrase, finally at peace, it signals the struggle without being explicit.
It does. Or for a difficult personality, you can say, she was a woman of very strong opinions who lived life entirely on her own terms.
Ah, strong opinions. We all know what that means.
We do, but it honors the reality of the person without being cruel. The source calls this emotional honesty. When we lie about the struggle at a funeral, we isolate the other survivors who know the truth. When we tell the truth that it was hard and that peace is a blessing, we connect with each other.
It gives everyone in the room permission to exhale.
Permission to exhale. That really is the core message of this entire deep dive, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it really is. So let's wrap this up. Let's distill this down. What does this all mean for you, for our listener today?
It means that if you are feeling relief, or have ever felt relief, after a death, you are not broken. You are not a monster. You are not heartless. You are human.
We've covered a lot. We've talked about the biology of the nervous system, that huge involuntary exhale when the tiger finally leaves the room. We've talked about the immense caregiver's burden, that 0 hour, where the work finally, blessedly, stops.
We've touched on the complicated relief of finding safety when a difficult or abusive person is gone. And most importantly, we've learned that two truths can exist at once. You can love them deeply, and you can still be glad the nightmare is over.
And that critical distinction. Relief is a response, not a wish. You didn't wish them away. You are just responding to the change in your reality.
And I think we need to leave you with one final thought, and it's on this idea of honoring the dead, because that is usually the root of all this guilt. We think our suffering is how we pay tribute.
I will suffer now to show the world how much I loved you.
But guilt does not honor the dead. Guilt serves no one. It doesn't bring them back, and it actively, painfully hurts the living. It hurts you.
True honor lies in authenticity. It's acknowledging the struggle they endured. It's acknowledging the immense struggle you endured alongside them, and it's allowing yourself the grace to survive it.
If they loved you, if they really, truly loved you, would they want you to carry a 50-pound backpack of guilt for the rest of your life? Or would they want you to set it down and finally take a full breath?
I think we all know the answer to that.
Ah.
You are not heartless, you are human. Thank you for listening to this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.
Take care.
Wait, hold on. I know we're trying to sign off here, but I just had a thought. I want to circle back really quickly to something you said about the safe listeners. I feel like we need to give a little bit of advice to the people on the other side of that conversation, the people who might be the safe listener for someone else.
That's a really great point, because the odds are, if you haven't been the griever in this specific situation yet, you will almost certainly be the friend of the griever at some point.
Exactly. So if someone you care about comes to you and confesses this, if they say, I have to tell you something, I'm just so glad it's over, what is the absolute worst thing you can do in that moment?
The worst thing you can do is correct them, is to police their feelings. Do not say, oh, don't say that. Do not say you don't mean that. And please do not say you'll miss him eventually. That just shuts the door, locks it, and throws away the key.
So what should you do instead? What's the right response?
Lean in. Don't pull away. Validate the context of their feeling. Say something like, of course you do. That makes so much sense.
Just simple validation.
Simple, powerful validation. Say, it makes sense that you would feel that way. You've been carrying so much for so long. Remind them of the load they were carrying. Say, you were doing the work of 3 people. It is okay to finally rest.
That validation must act like a pressure release valve for them.
It does. It tells them, I see you. I see the reality of the work you did, and I don't judge you for being human. Honestly, that simple act of witnessing their truth is the greatest gift you can give a grieving friend. It's worth more than 1,000 casseroles.
Worth more than 1,000 casseroles. I love that. It's about witnessing the truth of their experience, not just the socially acceptable, sanitized version of it.
Precisely.
Okay, now I think we can truly wrap up. This has been a heavy one, but I hope a necessary one. To everyone listening, whatever you are feeling, please be gentle with yourselves.
Be gentle.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.